It's time for Drummer Nation. Hi, this is your host, Michael Vosbein. Welcome to Drummer Nation, episode 19. We continue with some of the interviews I did at the Jazz Education Network Conference, or JEN, in January of this year in New Orleans. In this episode, I talk with noted historian, teacher, author, and musician, of course, Daniel Glass. We'll focus on his move to New York and his steady Monday night mainstay at Birdland's Cast Party. Tell me that next on Drummer Nation. Michael Vosbein, your host for Drummer Nation, back at the JEN show in New Orleans 2017 with none other than Daniel Glass.
Michael.
Great to see you. Thanks for doing my podcast.
Always a pleasure. It's been a while, man.
Well, yeah, it has, but on the other hand, you and I have done so many events and interviews and clinics together. We've worked together with both Bosphorus and Crescent. Yep. You were one of our premier artists, and always have appreciated you.
And the feeling is entirely mutual.
Well,
man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I know you well enough to know you always have a million things going on. So I'm just going to say, what's up?
What's up? What isn't up, I guess, might be more appropriate. No, there are a million things going on. I'm always busy building the brand, as they say, and working on the things that excite me and make me, the things I'm passionate about, which, as you know, is history and evolution of drumming, now music. I keep sort of expanding my horizons, expanding my audience. Last year I released a new DVD called From Ragtime to Rock, 100 Years, an introduction to 100 years of American popular music. And it sort of mirrors my Century Project DVD, if people are familiar with that, which looks at the evolution of drumming and the drum set from 1865 to 1965. So I had so many people that were family of, fans of, friends of drummers who said, I'm not even a drummer, and I watched the Century Project DVD and I loved it. And, why don't you make something like that for anybody who's into the evolution of American music? So I sort of took the same concept, but in this From Ragtime to Rock DVD, I adapted it. So it goes through the same historical period, but now it's focused on anybody who is into music. And I actually designed it for music teachers to be able to show their students, to give them an overview of that period. So you still have performances and kind of documentary style, and I'm narrating and all that. So that came out about a year ago, and it's doing really well. It's I'm marketing it towards middle school general music teachers, believe it or not. And apparently, according to people I've talked to, there are more of those than there are band directors in this country. So it's actually a pretty big market, and it's really exciting. There's a 70-page a teacher-student guide that goes with it, and so it's really an educational type product. But anybody who's checking it out, here's watching the podcast, can who's interested in the evolution of American music. It's typical fashion the way I present things, kind of.
Well, the one thing I've heard from people is, boy, that was interesting. I'm not a drummer. I'm not even a musician.
Right.
And it's good history. It's good social, cultural history.
Yeah.
And you made a mark for yourself in that.
I am passionate about it. And so the way I present the material, it's like, somebody just came up to you and said, man, I just saw the best movie. You have got to see this movie. Mm-hmm. Or you've got to check out this restaurant. Or, man, have you seen this band? Trust me, you got to go. And that's, do you know this? What happened? Do you understand, what happened in 1938 when, Benny Goodman did blah, and so that's how I've been sort of successful at bringing all of this stuff to new generations of 21st century musicians and drummers and educators, is that I'm just so over the top about it. And Passion, yeah. And it's not so much like, I'm an expert and you're, a person who doesn't know, so you need to sit at my feet.
No, it's more like passion. Come in, come dig this.
Yeah, it's inviting people into your world. And as soon as they go, oh, okay, I get it, because this is just like what I'm passionate about, but it just looks a little different, sounds a little different. But man, it's interesting. Then we're all good.
You turned up some very interesting stuff. You had some slides at your clinic the other day with some New Orleans instruments, some brass instruments. I've never heard of or seen before.
No.
I don't know what
Brass
they were,
instruments
how
were
you
very
found
different
them.
in the 1850s and 60s.
Boy,
and,
weren't they?
it's you said they look like insects.
They did.
And I would agree. They're
don't know
totally
what they
unusual looking.
And then you're into some very specific things. Like I was eavesdropping on one of your conversations here about just when did they invent the ride cymbal?
Right. Who
and-
was the first person to play a ride cymbal?
And
we don't
guess,
think about these
but you're
things.
looking for the definitive. Here it is.
Right, trying to find okay, I found a recording from 1936. Well, now I know I got that. Is there anything earlier than that? And how does that affect what we do today? It's now 80 years later from 1936. So how does that impact us now? Well, you might not think it does. Guess what, kids? It does.
It sure does. And other things like when did the Chinese toms that were tacked on heads convert into tunable heads?
Yeah.
The type we know today, they would have been calf back then, but tuning mechanisms.
Tom-toms were originally imported from China, They were ceremonial Chinese instruments, and the early drummers in the turn of the century, a big part of their gig was to create different sounds. You got to remember the early drum sets were bass drum, snare drum, and maybe one cymbal, or a cymbal mounted on your bass drum that you would hit with your bass drum pedal, had a clanger on it. You'd strike the pedal, clang the cymbal. But other than that, there was no hi-hat yet, no ride cymbals yet, no tom-toms yet. So drummers collected these things called traps, short for contraptions, which they started attaching to the set. So big Chinese immigration into the United States, 1850 to 1880, and drummers are saying, look at that little thing. If I grab that, boom, I hit that, a new sound effect. They come up with some way of mounting it onto that bass drum. Drum companies see this. What do? They go to China and start, there are villages there where they produce these ceremonial tom-toms. Now it's a business. Now it's an import-export business. And eventually, in the early part of the 20th century, the 20s probably, they start saying, well, why don't we just manufacture these tom-toms as, the same way we would a snare drum or a bass drum?
Well, that's still continuing today. It's market-driven economics, right?
It is.
Drummers look for new sounds, for new music, and manufacturers say, we can give them that.
That's where we got brushes. That's where we got tom-toms. All these things were like found objects a drummer needed to do something.
Well, still today, cymbals with holes in them.
Right.
Cajones with bass drum beaters.
Right.
Just whatever guys are hearing drives the market.
Exactly. And someone's coming up with a way to solve a problem, So that's sort of one thing that I'm working on.
Now, you had some changes in your life. I know you married a wonderful woman, Christina, and you moved to New York.
Yeah, that's old news already, man.
Well, but
6.5 years ago I moved to New York.
Bringing you along into the present now, what are you doing in New York?
Well, New York is it's an amazing place to live. It's a very difficult place to live, and I was sort of scratching my head going, am I insane for moving to New York? But part of why I went, I fell in love with a woman that lived there. I had been in LA for about 20 years. I had a whole career there with Royal Crown Review and got the drum history thing going there. But New York is really, the center of the universe, especially when it comes to jazz and when it comes to music history. And it was sort of a new challenge for me. Can I climb this mountain, this Mount Everest? It's very cold, obviously. It's hard on the body. You got
cold in many ways.
Yes, but you gotta carry everything with you. Taking the subways. If you have a car, it's tough. Living in a tiny apartment. How do you teach lessons and all those kinds of things? But what New York has, I've fallen in some really cool stuff in New York. I started a few years ago. About 6 months after I got to town, I got invited to Birdland to sit in. They have on Monday night a show called Cast Party. Have you've been, right?
I've been to Birdland. I haven't been to
you haven't been to
Cast
Cast Party? Oh, you got to come, man. It's the coolest night. So the reason it's called Cast Party is that on Monday nights, that's traditionally the night that the Broadway shows are off.
They're dark.
Yeah, they're dark. And so all of the folks that were doing the shows had the night off, and they would all get together. Literally, it started, at somebody's house. Like, I think Liza Minnelli's house.
Show people being show.
Show people just singing songs they want to sing, having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the show's been going for 15 years. For the last 9 or 10, it's been at Birdland. And they didn't have a drummer in the house band. It was piano and bass. So I came down and sat in one night. A friend, I just got to town. I sit in. It's Birdland. I've never played the Birdland stage before. And it just so happened that this phenomenal it's not just Broadway people. They have all kinds of great musicians who sit in there all the time. I should say this is an open mic night, except that it's not anything like any open mic night you've ever been to in your life. It's not Joe Blow at the coffee house with the acoustic guitar.
It's open mic night with legendary people.
Legendary people are sitting in. Liza Minnelli, Dave Koz comes in all the time. Barry Manilow has sat in. Kenny Loggins. And then people you wouldn't expect, like Lisa Lampanelli is in there all the time. And she either gets up and does her nasty comedy, she puts down everybody in the house, or she sings. And Weird Al Yankovic has been in there. Donny Osmond, Kenny Loggins comes in, and he's doing a country thing now.
A variety of people.
And then a lot of people that, unless you're in the cabaret world, you may not have heard of them, but they are legends in the cabaret world. And this show has grown over the last. The leader of our house trio is a guy named Billy Stritch, who was Liza Minnelli's musical director for about 25 years. She's not working anymore, so now he just landed the gig with Tony Bennett. So you saw Tony. Yeah, saw Tony Bennett's 90th anniversary thing. He's playing on that.
He is. I missed that. Everybody's been raving about it.
Yeah, a lot of people have. So it's no small potatoes. And so for the last 6 years, basically, I sat in. This incredible Brazilian guitar player was the person sitting in. The guys in the band are amazing, amazing musicians. We play any style, anything that comes our way, and we just locked like. It was like love at first
People
note.
bring charts, or you just all...
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But often those charts go to the piano player. The bass player walks over and stands behind the piano player. So I'm taking cues, audibles, it's been, I call it going to the gym. And imagine if you went to the gym at a place where everybody watched your workout. Like, it's not like, there's no hiding out. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
There's no room for messing up.
It's a lonely chair back there sometimes.
This is Birdland, So, there's no break. We go for 3 hours every Monday. Sometimes I get a couple songs off. Sometimes I play for 3 hours without stopping. 30 some odd singers.
But you're digging it. You're loving it.
I love it because it is like going to the gym. I'm working on my focus, concentration. You might get 5 sort of Sinatra-style type singers up in a row, and you get 5 Fly Me to the Moon type tunes in a row. So how are you going to make them different? How are you going to hit the reset button on every single song and lock in with whoever is up there? Because that person, I got one night I did Caspar. I've gotten so much work out of it. That's where a lot of my work has come from in New York City. I'm working with a woman named Marilyn May, who again is not well known outside of the cabaret world. She's a legend. 88 years old. She's like a Peggy Lee or one of those classic, like a Tony Bennett, man. She's only 2 years younger than Tony Bennett. She's in full form. She does high kicks in the show. She's funny, and she knows what she wants in a drummer, man. And she is.
You gotta give it.
She is the real deal. Yeah. So through that, I now work with her. I'm going to Florida with her for a week in March. I've traveled all over. I go up to Provincetown every summer with her, and you got to be on your toes. I mean, it's cool.
What you said about. Let's say you have 5 songs in a row of the same general style. Yeah. You got to put a little different sauce on each one.
Yes,
in the same way, piano players will say, "Well, we can't play. We just play a tune in that key." They won't do 2 tunes in the same key, or they'll change the tempo a little bit, or they'll change just so everybody gets a fresh stab at it.
Absolutely, and you get everything under the sun. We have virtuoso 11-year-old kids that come in who are in some Broadway show who are out of hand great.
Yeah,
you get jugglers. I mean, it's almost like a variety show. Tap dancers, the best tap dancers in New York City, black, white, come through there. And they all want to trade fours.
I was just going to say that.
So it's a brush thing, Yeah. And there's some great video that I've put up, different kinds of things. There's this incredible woman from Sweden named Gunhilda Carling. Her name is Gunhilda. She's a superstar in Sweden and in Europe. She's not very well known in the States. She's like James Morrison. She plays trumpet. She plays 12 instruments. I mean, she plays violin, trumpet, trombone, bagpipes.
Really?
She tap dances.
All of them well.
She sings. Yeah. All of them at high level. She comes from a family band, very old school. So she comes into Birdland, and she and I are like best friends instantly because she was a fan of Royal Crown Revue.
Okay.
So that gig is like this little corner of New York, but it's a whole world. And I invite anybody to come on a Monday night in New York City. I've been there for 6.5 years. I don't plan to leave. It's kind of like a Broadway chair, so if I go on the road, it's waiting for me when I come back.
Well, you'll
Just get a
see me
sub.
one night.
It's a
there.
great night, and I can put people on the list. It's actually quite easy, so I'll hook you up. Also in New York, I started last year. Was my first year. I felt that I do a lot of teaching. People probably know that. I studied with Freddie Gruber. I teach that kind of hand technique stuff. But what I really dug into is what is swing. How do you really get somebody to swing? How do you really tackle those 4 quarter notes and build that spangling pattern, as a drummer, so that you really are doing it, the right way, the historical way, that you're really articulating what needs to be articulated as, say, the musicians in the Count Basie Orchestra did it. And I think a lot of people underestimate that because they, the thing that frustrates me about jazz education in general is that it's all about the independence, right? That's the first thing.
For drum set.
For drum set.
Independence for maybe other musicians watching and being the ability to do 4 things with 4 limbs.
Yes.
And that's a daunting task as a drummer, but it can get to the
problem
point where
is
overrides
there's
the
too
concerns of
much
the music.
emphasis on that.
Right.
And too much emphasis on drumistic concerns rather than musical concerns, rather than at the end of the day, ding, 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 is actually ding, 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 ding. And why is it that 100 drummers can go ding, 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 but only one is swinging? Anybody can play quarter notes, but how are you thinking about the quarter notes? What is the function of the pulse? Where does that come from? What should you be doing, right? You can play on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. How do you know if you're playing a quarter note or an eighth note or a 16th note? If you're hitting a cymbal, the cymbal rings. So, and that's important that you know, because the rest of the band, they have to know because they're playing an instrument that has a tone on it, right? So they have to know the difference between ta, 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 or ta, 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 or ta, 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 ta. And it's a huge difference if they play those 3 different ways. So how do we do that as a drummer? And there's a very specific thing about how we move. It isn't so much the sound at first, it's how we move and how we feel that pulse going by. And we have to feel it the way that it was designed to be felt, the way that it was designed in the 1930s by the Count Basie Orchestra, and it was designed to get 7,000, I showed a picture, 7,000 people in a ballroom. Dancing. Well, how are you going to drive 7,000 people without blowing away volume-wise the horns that are right next to you, since nobody had amplification in the 1930s? The band didn't, the bass and guitar didn't. So, I've sort of really done a lot of thinking about this stuff. So out of all that, I've created the Daniel Glass Jazz Intensive.
This is your host, Marco Vosbein, and I want to thank our friends at Atlanta Pro Percussion, Danette Classic Drums, Sabian Cymbals, and Classic Drummer Magazine. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.